Okay, thanks, Sean. Also, thanks all of you for sticking around until the end for the last few talks. I just wanted, before I start, just to say thank you to the organizers for inviting me along. It's a real pleasure to be here, and particularly Cece and Sean for what's been a really great day. As Sean said, my name's Michael. I'm based at Goldsmiths in University of London, and what I want to talk to you about today is some work we've been doing for the last 10 years or so, really, looking at something called mirror sensory synesthesia, or mirror touch, or mirror pain synesthesia. Um, so what I thought I'd just kick off with is just give you a brief overview of what it is we work on in my lab, and I'll go a bit more into the specifics. So for those of you who don't know, the work in my lab really is centered around trying to understand how it is we understand the social signals displayed by other people. But not only in terms of how do we understand them, like for instance here we could say, okay, well this is the emotion the person is experiencing, but more so how it is that we're able to share the experiences of others. So how it is in this type of situation, we might not only say, okay, well, they're happy, but you can get a sense of what it might feel like to be in that situation, experiencing the experience of the other person. And one set of mechanisms that's thought to be important to this is something which we call vicarious perception. Now, vicarious perception largely refers to our ability to co-represent the experiences of other people. And I know there's a few people laughing there. You can laugh at Jamie Ward up here, basically feeling a bit of touch on his own face. He has a similar video of me in one of his talks, so this is retribution, basically. But basically, in all of us, when we see somebody being touched or we see somebody in pain, we tend to map these experiences onto the same types of representations as when we experience the state ourselves. So to make that a little bit clearer for you, for instance, if you view touch to Jamie like this, what happens is in your brain, you activate similar brain regions as when you are touched yourself. So what's showing up here on you, on the left-hand side here, this is what happens when we are touched ourselves, if someone touches us. What you see is you see this activation in parts of the brain, typically the somatosensory cortices. Now, when we see somebody else being touched, what you see here is the green areas that are overlaid. You'll see some of these are overlapping with the same areas as when you experience it yourself. And we refer to this as a mirror touch system, a mirroring system, and this is a property that all of us display to a major degree. It's not only evident for touch, it's also evident for pain. So for instance, if we see somebody in pain, we activate similar parts of our brain as when we experience pain ourselves. And this particular experience, this vicarious perception, as it were, has been particularly useful for studying complex social skills. One example is empathy. Part of the reason for this is because vicarious perception can be contextually and socially modulated. So, for instance, the extent to which we perceive the other person as being similar to ourselves can influence the degree to which we have our level of vicarious activity that we map. So for example, one study looked at where they told people that people either supported the same or different political parties as them. And then you saw images of them experiencing touch. And a degree to which you mirrored that experience varied according to whether that person supported the same party as you, your in-group, or supported the out-group. But you might be wondering why I'm talking to you about this at a Synesthesia conference. Well, it's all well and good. It's useful to study empathy. It's interesting in a social neuroscience perspective. But the reason why it comes in relation to synesthesia is in relation to something which we refer to as only implicitly activate the same brain areas. For some people, if they see somebody experiencing touch or they see someone in pain, they actually feel a physical sensation on their own body. And since the first reported case of this in 2005, my lab and other labs have done quite a bit of work trying to map out individuals that experience conscious vicarious touch, which we also refer to as mirror touch synesthesia, and also individuals who experience conscious vicarious pain. And by this, we refer to this as mirror pain synesthesia, so people who feel pain when they see pain in others. And really, to give you a bit of a feel for what we mean by this, it's kind of easier to put it into the words of a synesthete. And those of you who were at Joel's reading last night will have heard him put across some very eloquent quotes to explain what it's like to be a mirror touch synesthete. So I just thought I'd put one up from his book. And basically, as you see, his description is at the conscious level, you know, if he sees somebody being touched, he feels the physical sensation of touch while observing it occur to other people. Triggered automatically by the sight of other people, he feels a mirrored touch on parts of his body that correspond to who he's looking at. If he's looking at the face, it's your left is his right, your right is his left. It's like looking in a mirror. And this is a classic example of the type of experience that a mirror touch synesthete reports. And although obviously Joel's book's come out this year, when I first came along to start studying this experience back in 2005, there had only been one case report in the literature. And so we wanted to start out by going and asking some very, what might be viewed as basic questions, such as, well, how common is this experience? Can we establish, is there groups of people rather than just a single case? And so our first question of how common mirror touch synesthesia was led us to conduct a study where we screened a number of undergraduates based at Sussex University in the UK and also based at University College London. And basically we gave people a questionnaire to screen them for synesthesia, and one of our questions on it asked them, when you see somebody being touched, do you feel physical sensations of touch on your own body? And anybody who responded positively to this, we invited into the lab, and then we tested them to try and verify the authenticity of their experiences. And using this approach, we established a prevalence of around 1.5% of people who experience mirror touch synesthesia. And this is plotted compared to other types of synesthesia, which comes from a study from Julia Simner that came out just before ours. So this puts mirror touch synesthesia up there as one of the more common types, seemingly equivalent to things like grapheme color that was quite well studied. But an important thing to note here is this estimate, as I say, is based on testing people and confirming the authenticity of their experience, because if we look purely at self-report alone, this rate was even higher. It was actually around about 10% of people that were reporting it, much lower rate that actually passed objective tests. And this is something to keep in mind if you're a researcher working on mirror touch, is you can get quite a high false positive rate based on self-report alone, so something just to keep in mind. But in terms of the tests that we use, at the time there was nothing in the literature for us to use, so we designed a slightly novel test, making use of the classic synesthetic Stroop task, except this time in the context of observed touch. So what we did was we bring people into the lab. This is my mum, by the way. I always have to have a shout out to her because I know she's watching. So basically, we brought people into the lab. We showed them images of people being touched, their movies, where they would see a hand coming in, touching somebody else, in this instance on the face. The idea here being that if you're a synesthete, someone reporting that when you see somebody being touched on the face, you experience a synesthetic touch on the face, what would happen is you would get an experience like this. So the crucial thing that we did in this study, though, was that while the people were observing touch other people, we applied real touch to their own face. And real touch could either occur in the same location as the synesthetic touch or in a different location as the synesthetic touch. So it's either congruent or incongruent. And the task here for participants was simply to tell us, where are you experiencing real touch? So ignore any synesthetic touch, inhibit it, don't pay attention to it, just focus on where you're experiencing the real touch that we're applying to you. And the expectation that we had was that when synesthetic touch and real touch were in the same location, people would be faster than when synesthetic touch and real touch were in a different location, because there's a conflict. It's going to slow you down. And this is exactly what we saw. So what's plotted for you on the screen right now is the red bars are congruent trials, the blue bars are incongruent trials, so the trials where it conflicted. And as you can see, our mirror touch synesthetes on the side here showed a significant difference on this task. And this was a larger congruency effect than was seen in the controls as well. So this was one evidence that we could verify people's self-reports in the lab. One other line of evidence that we used this in our prevalence study as well, was to look at the types of errors that people made when they did this task. Because what we found was, yes, there was a difference in reaction time, but also our mirror touch synesthete showed a certain pattern of errors, whereby on trials like this, where real touch was in the wrong location to the synesthetic touch, they would quite often confuse the two and start to report experiencing touch on both of the cheeks rather than on just one of them. And they would do this more so than controls, and they would do this more so than any other error types. So they don't differ on other error types you might make. It was always specific to their synesthetic self-reports. Okay. So that was some of the original stuff we were doing on mirror touch. More recently, we've also asked another question, which is to talk about people who don't report feeling touch when they see touch to other people, but report that when they see somebody in pain, they feel a physical sensation of pain on their own body. And similar to our mirror touch work, we wanted to ask questions of, well, firstly, how common is this? And in order to do this, obviously, ethically bringing people into the lab and putting them in pain is not ideal. And even then, actually, the measures of pain can often be difficult. Quite often, they're based on self-reports. So what we did here was we developed something which we called the Vicarious Pain Questionnaire, which basically, and I apologize to any mirror touch synesthetes in the thing, don't look at the corner if you can. I'll go back a slide for a moment because I just saw the reaction. Basically, we developed a questionnaire where we showed people a series of videos of painful images or painful experiences, and also some non-painful experiences as well. And we would ask them, do you experience any sensation of pain on this? We would then ask them, is it localized? So where do you feel it on your body? So for instance, if you saw pain going like a needle going into someone's hand, do you feel it on your own hand, or is it somewhere else on your body? Or is it just general? Do you just have a general change? We also gave them a number of descriptors, and these descriptors include, was it a sensory experience? Does it feel like it's tingling? Does it feel like pain? Or also, is it more affective? So is it more of an emotional kind of reaction that you're getting? So I'm going to whiz past that slide for you, Cece, or you can shut your eyes if you like to. Yeah? Okay. So if I can keep it up for 1 second while she's looking away. So the idea is, do you experience any sensations? Second question is, if you do, does it have a specific location? And then, if depending on what you say there, how would you describe it? You know, would you describe it as sensory, or would you describe it in any way as affective? And we ran this in a rather large sample of participants, and then ran something called a cluster analysis, which allows us to effectively take our data and find groups within the data to see what type of groups pulled out. And what's plotted out for you here, CC, we're good again. What's plotted for you here is what we found. So at the bottom here, we'll start with these guys, the boring people. I say that because I'm one of these guys. People who don't report experiencing any conscious sensations when they see images of other people in pain. That's not to say they don't have any empathy, it's just they don't experience any conscious sensation. So we had about 73% of people that pulled out on our cluster analysis when we did this. Now, what was also interesting though was we also pulled out two other groups that you can see up here. So one was this general affective group. This was around 10% of our participants. These are people who said, yes, I do feel some type of pain response when I see these other people in pain, but it's not necessarily localized on my body parts. Yeah, it's not localized specifically. If I saw someone being with pain to the hand, I don't feel it on my hand. I just have a general sensation, and their descriptors were much more affective. They're saying much more emotional, nauseating, these types of elements. Now, they contrasted to our sensory localized group, which was a group of individuals who said, in this case, I experience pain when I see pain to other people. That pain is very much localized on my body. So if I see a needle going through someone's hand, I feel it on my hand. And their descriptors were much more sensory in nature. You know, it's painful, or it's tingling, or it's somatic, as it were. So having identified these groups, we then wanted to say, okay, well, that's interesting. Our cluster analysis pulls these apart. Can we in any way show that they can be verified? Is there some type of profile where they might show maybe a neural pattern, a difference in the brain between the subtypes? So we started to do some work looking at this using brain imaging. And so just to remind you, this is what you would typically see in a brain imaging study. If, for instance, I took control participants, people who don't have mirror pain synesthesia, and put them in a brain scanner, what you find is if they see people in pain, they activate similar parts of the brain as when they feel pain themselves. And key areas that flag up are typically this area here, the anterior insula, and areas around here which are the cingulate cortex. This is often called someone's pain matrix. We tend to recruit this area when we're in pain ourselves, but we also recruit it when we see other people in pain, implicitly, unconsciously. Yeah? Now, we wanted to take this type of approach that's been done quite regularly. This is a nice review article of this process, been done quite often in typical adults, and we wanted to then apply it to synesthetes and see what would happen in their brains when they saw pain to other people. And I think the next slide is one you're going to want to just slightly veer your head again for. Okay, and so basically what we did in the study was as follows. We had a series of videos whereby people would either see painful experiences or non-painful comparisons. We would show people these videos in the scanner, and then we would ask them, did you experience any type of conscious response to that, and could you rate it? And our participants worked out this way. We had typical controls based on our cluster analysis, so those people that don't report any sensations. We had the affective general group, so a group of people who report the sensations, but say it's not localized, it's just a general heightened sensation. And then the sensory localized group, the group who report a very specific sensation. And crucially, what we had in our study is we have hand pain and foot pain. So we've got two body parts, which I'll show you as we go on, allows us to try to identify when, for instance, the sensory localized group see someone's hand in pain, do they activate hand regions of the brain versus if they see someone's foot in pain. We'll come on to that. And so to give you an idea of what we pull out in our results, firstly, at a group level, we find these areas here, this ACC, AI, and dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, these are typically your pain matrix, the parts of the brain that are active when you experience pain yourself, and they're often the areas that people activate when we all see other people in pain. And firstly, our two groups, our sensory localized and our affective general, both showed heightened activity in this area when they saw people in pain. So they were recruiting the mirror pain system more than the typical adult control, so to a greater degree, which is consistent with their self-reports that they are feeling pain when they see pain to other people. What was particularly interesting, and Cece, just one more time, I promise, was when we contrasted the difference between hand and foot actions, because in your brain, your somatosensory cortex is organized in such a way that you have a region specific for the hand, a region specific for the foot, a region specific for the arms, the trunk, etc. And so what we did here was we compared in our groups what happens in the somatosensory cortex, this sensory region of the brain when you're seeing people in pain. And we found that our sensory localized group showed greater activity in the somatosensory system compared to our controls, but this was somatotopically specific, so that when they saw pain to the hand, it was activating the hand region. When they saw pain to the foot, it was overactivity in the foot region. In contrast, our affective general group, what they showed compared to controls was greater somatosensory cortex activity, so a greater sensory mapping of pain, but it wasn't specific. It wasn't that you got this body part matching, it was just a general greatened activity, which is again consistent with their reports that I'm having a response, but it's just generalized, it's not specific to a body part. And I'm going to quickly move past that because people don't like the videos of pain. Okay, so that's what we were finding in terms of our mirror pain synesthetes that we worked with. But what about people who experience touch, mirror touch synesthetes? What's going on in their brains? And so, just to remind you, this is what you typically see in control participants, people that don't report any type of synesthesia. And what you find here is, as I showed you earlier, these blue regions, the areas of the brain that are active when we experience touch. If we see someone being touched, we recruit similar parts of our brain, overlapping regions, the mirror touch system. Now, what then happens in mirror touch synesthetes? Are they similar to mirror pain synesthetes? Mirror pain synesthetes recruit the same system that typical adults do, but they recruit it to a greater degree? Will we see the same thing here? So this pattern is shown, and it was first shown in 2005 by Sarah Jane Blakemore's lab. And since in 2013, alongside Jamie Ward and Henning Hull, we showed that a group of mirror touch synesthetes also show this. So in essence, for individuals with mirror touch synesthesia, if they see somebody being touched, they overactivate the system, this mirror touch system, the system that's involved in mirroring the experiences of other people, or the tactile experiences. So putting that a little bit together, what that was pointing to was that both, if you look at this top line up here, across all subtypes that we've just touched about, mirror pain, mirror touch, the different subgroups, when these individuals see other people experiencing particular states, so when mirror touch synesthetes see people experiencing touch, when mirror pain synesthetes see people experiencing pain, they overactivate brain systems that are involved in mirroring that experience. That's to say that they recruit the same systems we all do, but they hyperactivate these systems. And this particular approach has led to something which people have called threshold theory. And this is one way in which people try to explain, why do people experience the sensations of others? Why do people experience mirror touch synesthesia? Why do they experience mirror pain synesthesia? And threshold theory goes a little bit like this. The idea is that what will happen is people, let's say, would observe touch. Now, for most of us, there will be a degree where we map it onto the same parts of our brain as when we experience touch ourselves. We do it to a small extent, yeah?